Welcome, everyone, to another random walk down Mill Street. Tonight's topic, I think you're going to find interesting. It's going to be a summary of something that I hope to publish. So this is sort of a preview of something that will ultimately become a more academically refined form. But here we are. Maybe you can even help me by sending me in directions I need to go. But the story, and I'm going to share my screen now. Let's do that. Slideshow. Okay. Okay, here you are. The title of today's talk is called "Lost and Found: The Unexpected Discovery of a Historic Torah Pointer." And I don't know how many of you I have shared this discovery with. Hopefully, not too many. But it's really a fascinating story. And the story begins in 2019, or the way I'm going to tell the story begins in 2019. For in that year, shortly before the pandemic, at the end of the year in September, October, we had Sotheby's valuation service come to the synagogue and give us an appraisal for our silver, ritual, almost entirely ritual silver. But whatever we had in the building, we took out for them to look at, and even some things that weren't silver, but just valuable items of our synagogue that ought to have an appraisal for insurance purposes. And the reason we did this was because the last comprehensive appraisal for the synagogue for insurance purposes was done in 1999. And then that was fine for a while, and we didn't have any interest in spending much more on the insurance that we had, which was already quite costly. But then, as you might know, Sheriff Israel was embroiled really from 2012, and in some fashion it still goes on, with litigation regarding Torah Synagogue in Newport, and specifically with the rimonim, the accoutrements of the Torah scroll, the rimonim made by Meyer Myers that were in Newport, and for which we needed to update our insurance and get appraisals. And so they did that first, and then they realized that the whole kit and caboodle needed to be updated since 1999, hadn't been done. And so they brought Sotheby's in. Now, Sotheby's, at least at the time, I didn't see it on their website anymore, but at the time, Sotheby's will perform a valuation for houses of worship for free. They will come into the house of worship and essentially inventory and give a valuation of what they have. Now, Sheriff Israel is an old congregation, and we have more items than most synagogues do. Not more than every synagogue. Some synagogues have many more items than we do, but it's a pretty large collection. And so Sotheby's came in on a date at the end of September or early October in 2019. They had 4 employees. We set them up in the sanctuary, and basically my job that day was to go around to the various places in the building, collect the ritual silver, and bring it to them for photographing and to be inspected by the experts. They had 2 experts there. They had somebody there whose job was just to type. They had another person who was photographing. It was a very well-oiled machine. And they produced later on an inventory and appraisal with valuations. I'm not going to share the valuations tonight. It's not really important. I didn't ask permission from the synagogue to share them, so I'm not going to. But it looked something like this. These are some pages from that valuation. I didn't actually give you the numbers here. And these are pages that just have to do with the pointers, because tonight we're going to talk about the pointers, the yad. And this is what it looks like. You get a picture, a description, if there's a maker's mark, an error, the dimensions, etc., etc. Put this somewhere that it can be safe. Okay. And before I go much further, I kind of assume that you all know what a Torah pointer is, a yad, but I should never assume. So very briefly, when reading from the Torah, it is discouraged. I was going to say maybe improper is the right word. Improper to touch the parchment with one's fingers, unless one really had some special need to, some requirement to, if the Torah was falling or slipping or some reason to touch it. If there's no reason to touch it, then it should be avoided. So much so that there is even a quote in the Talmud that person who touches Torah scroll, he will end up being buried naked. It's some kind of denigration that, if you treat the Torah scroll improperly, you will be treated improperly. But the idea is that you have to treat the Torah scroll with respect, and that includes not touching it. And so, when we read from the Torah, the person reading does not touch the words, but he is showing it to the person who was called to the Torah. So how does he do so? He uses a pointer. And over time, and there I should mention, there are no pointers known from antiquity. There's no pointers in the Dead Sea Scrolls, just like there are no cloaks from the Dead Sea Scrolls or rimonim from the Dead Sea Scrolls. So there's no pointers known in antiquity. The earliest pointers we know of begin in the early modern period. There are some indications that even earlier there may have been some simplified pointers, and that's really beyond the topic of my talk tonight. But I'll just very tantalizingly, I have a friend who has discussed with me the possibility that the Torah pointer that we have developed from something called the digitus, which was a pointer in the shape of a finger, very long, elongated hand with a finger, that was used by church choirs or by certain lay leaders in the church, in the Catholic Church, that would point out the place of the reading or to point out the music to the choristers. But that's a speculation, and even that very object, the digitus, is not well known or documented. So we'll leave that just as some bait for some future talk. Okay. But getting back to the pointers of Shered Israel. So here you see a whole bunch of them. We have many. There are many. This is not even all though on the collection on your screen. You'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I think we have 16 or so pointers. But here's a whole bunch of them, and you'll see they have different eras. They're from the 20th century, some are 19th century, some are the earliest one on this page anyway is from circa 1800. Some of them are very long, like this one is almost 13 inches. Some of them are fairly short, like this one on the top, which I think is 7 inches. And some of them are broken, like this one. Anyway, I'm going around that day during the day of the appraisal and getting different items for them. And one of the things that I take out are some broken pieces that look like this. They're two pieces in the same bag or the same box. And this is what they look like. And when I showed them to the appraisers, they immediately saw that it said Reverend Jacques Judah Lyons on the hand, and they turned it over and they saw this. Had to look at it with a jeweler's magnifying glass. It's very hard to see otherwise, but if you can see what it says here, it says MM. MM is the maker's mark of a very famous colonial era silversmith named Meyer Myers. And so Myers is pretty famous and valuable and very collectible. And so everyone got excited when this was found. In fact, there was a little shout. There was only be 4 or 5 people in the room, and there was like, "Hey, and Meyer Myers!" People got excited. Everyone wanted to see it, and but it was a broken piece. This was just half of a pointer, and it didn't really look like it went together with this other part that it was being kept with. In fact, the other piece here was all. It looked like they were being kept together because it said Jacques Judah Lyons on the hand, and it said Jacques Judah Lyons. It's hard to see here, but on this piece here, but 2 broken pieces that said Reverend J.J. Lyons but they didn't seem to be from the same pointer. So it was half a pointer that said Meyer Myers on it, or MM, which was very exciting. Now, I'm going to get back to the pointer, but I'm just going to talk about Meyer Myers a little bit. Meyer Myers, for those of you who don't know, maybe you've heard the name, maybe you know something, maybe you know a lot. Meyer Myers is a very distinguished, very renowned colonial New York silversmith. He was also the president of the Silversmiths Guild. He was an excellent silversmith. He wasn't the only one. There were quite a few, but in certain styles, he was almost unparalleled. His chase work, his carved out pieces of the silver, the chasing is really superior, and he's also fairly prolific in that there are hundreds of his pieces remaining from the colonial era, which is more the output than most other silversmiths, maybe even any. And he was very popular in his day, and even so to today for people who collect silver. On the same level as Paul Revere. But he's also famous, not just because of his domestic silver, coffee pots and trays and silverware and other items. He's also quite famous for being Jewish. He was the first Jewish silversmith in America, and for creating ritual silver. So he wasn't just a Jewish silversmith, he also created ritual silver. There's not a lot of it, but there is some. Most famously, 5 sets of rimonim, which you can see on your screen here, just one of each pair, and a circumcision shield that you see on the right. All of them are marked Myers and different kinds of markings. And you'll see that he has a certain style, which is almost identical in 2 of them. The third one has a similar form, but it's not chased, it's not cut. And this one resides here in New York. This one resides in the Museum of Fine Arts. It was in the synagogue at Newport previously. And this one was a donation to Shereth Israel by a woman named Caroline Myers Cohen. And so all of these are owned by Shereth Israel. And these 2 are owned by Mikveh Israel in Philadelphia. And you can see these 4 have a very similar form to each other. The tops are not exactly the same. They're not identical, but they have very similar form. And this one kind of goes off on a little different design. And that's it. That's all the ritual silver known by this very famous silversmith. And so these have, over the course of time, and especially in modern times, be given astronomical valuations and are really very famous by now. I expect most of you have heard of them in some or seen them in some fashion over the course of the last 10, 15 years. And so, that being said, the discovery of another piece of ritual silver by Meyer Myers is significant, period. It's noteworthy. It's worthy of publishing, which is what I hope to do one of these days on its own, without any other information to add to it. but our story does get more interesting. Oh, this is a blank screen. Okay, let me go back. There is tantalizing information, which I was hoping to get an image for you, but I don't have. But in the book about Meyer Myers by David Barquist, who was the academic expert on Meyer Myers, he quotes a letter from Bernard Gratz of Philadelphia, where he was writing to an acquaintance in London, asking him to get certain items, religious items, prayer books, other things that they need for the synagogue in Philadelphia. And then he says something to the effect of, and I'm sorry I don't have the exact quote for you, you don't have to get me the yad, which I asked you to get, because Mr. Myers is sending it from New York. So there is indication that Meyer Myers made a Torah pointer for Philadelphia sometime in the 1760s or 1770s, but it does not. But we don't know. That's the only reference to it. Now, in the middle of the 20th century, a Torah pointer came up on the market marked Myers. And it came up in Philadelphia and was offered for sale by a Philadelphia dealer. But to make an interesting story short, because we have our own interesting story to tell, that pointer, which you can see here, was discovered to be a forgery. And they had taken a 19th century Polish or Central European Torah pointer, which you see here, given it this mark, and it was when it was under examination, it was discovered to be not authentic. The mark was not authentic. The Torah pointer was not the right time period or anything. It was completely false. Which meant that the Torah pointer that was mentioned by Bernard Gratz was missing, not out there, just referred to and not actually known about. And here we have in Sheretz Israel a Torah pointer, or part of a Torah pointer, that says MM on it. Okay, with me so far? Yes? Well, let me take this moment to take a look at the chat. Okay, I hope that Claude can hear by now. Alexander is talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls, which I'm going to skip over. The stick next to the shield. I think that is, I'm not a mohel, but I think there is a instrument used to move some of the layers of skin before cutting them. And yes, Yale had a great exhibit that was curated by David Barquist, who I referred to the letter that is quoted by him. Was MM the only type of mark for Myers? Not at all. He had several different types of MM. He had several different types of Myers written out this way. And knowing the different types of, and he used those marks in different eras. So actually a lot can be said by the type of mark being used. The one that we found on the pointer that I showed you earlier comes from approximately the mid-1760s, although it was used for quite a long period of his career, especially on smaller items, which wouldn't get the long Myers name on it. Okay. So on that day, I'm taking you back to that day in October of 2019 when we made this discovery. There was a little whoop whoop, and everyone was excited to find this Meyer Myers mark on a yad. And then it was my turn to take a look at it. Everybody else had a turn. All the experts had a turn to take a look at it. And then I meekly said, could I see it? And they let me take a look. And I immediately had a recollection that this was familiar. And I said, oh, 1 second. And I went to the little synagogue, opened the Heichal of the little synagogue, and pulled out the Torah pointer that we use every Monday and Thursday, which is this. This is the Torah pointer that we use every Monday and Thursday in the synagogue, and which story is really the heart of what I'm going to tell you today, or the second part B of the discovery. And as you can see, this part looks remarkably similar to the other part that we found that was marked MM. So I brought it back to the experts. I said, this was going to be one of the ones I showed you anyway. Let's take a look at it right now. And we put it next to each other, and you can really see how they are two pieces of the same yad, right? So now we have this mystery, or somewhat of a mystery, of this composite, we'll call it, yad, which has the back of one and the front of another. What is going on over there? That is the next question that we have to deal with. But before we get to that, so we were very excited by this find. We kept it under wraps. We knew we had to do a lot of testing. Would the silver of this piece match the silver of that piece? We knew we were going to have to get laboratory testing done. We were going to have to do research in the archives. We were going to have to do all sorts of things to verify, especially knowing that there had been a forgery of a yad, to verify that this yad was authentic. And then we have to decide what to do with it. It's broken, all these kinds of questions. So we sort of kept it under wraps. The very next Shabbat, after this appraisal was done, the congregation had a Shabbaton in Newport, Rhode Island, at the Torah synagogue. It was a tense kind of time, but it was a time when the lawsuit had been settled in our favor. Not settled, decided in our favor, and we went up there and we had a Shabbaton, and our hosts were being very nice to us, and a lot of goodwill was trying to be built. And we ran the service in the Spanish-Portuguese style, at least mostly, especially the main service on Shabbat morning. And it happened to be that Rabbi Rode was not coming with us on that trip, and Rabbi Soloveitchik and I were splitting up the Chazanut duties, and Rabbi Soloveitchik read most of the parasha, and I read one or two aliyot towards the end. I forgot which parasha it was, but it's significant because I rarely read from the Torah, but this was one occasion that I did. And I get up to the Teba, and they hand me the yad. And I had just had this experience of finding this Meyer Myers yad, and this is the yad that they hand me. I don't know if you can see it, but it is almost exactly the same thing that I had just looked at a day or 2 days before in New York City that had Meyer Myers mark on it. And I was exploding in my mind that I need to tell someone about this, but couldn't, because I don't want to have another lawsuit on our hands. That would be something unbelievable. So I kept it under wraps, and I came back to New York, and I told a few confidants that had been involved in the appraisal, and I told the Parnas, and we were trying to figure out what to do, what the next steps would be. We're going to hold this off to the side and remember it. We're going to come back to it in the end. Now, remember I told you in 1999 they had an appraisal of the synagogue silver, and this was part of it. This composite thing was part of it, and the person who did the appraisal called it the Hendricks pointer because it had a dedication on it that said it was given by David and Tamar de Pool. I forget the exact year, I think 1941, 1942, in honor of the uh, silver wedding anniversary of Henry Hendricks, who was the Parnass at the time, and his wife Rosalie Nathan Hendricks. If you are old-time synagogue members and you recognize those names, that is the parents of Ruth Schulson. I don't know how many people remember Ruth Schulson, but her parents were Henry Hendricks and Rosalie Nathan Hendricks. Actually, her name was Rosalie Gomez. Nathan became Rosalie Gomez Hendricks. Anyway, that is what was on the dedication. And it was used from the time it was dedicated, and I'm going to say 1941, 1942, I don't know the exact year, until 2003 or 2004. And it was kept in the little synagogue, and it was used every Monday and Thursday. And then about the year 2003 or 2004, I don't have an exact date or an exact time, it went missing from the synagogue, presumed to have been stolen. There were several items of silver that were stolen in a period of time when the synagogue was restoring the lighting, restoring the windows, restoring the sanctuary. There was a few years where a lot of work was being done in the synagogue, and there were a lot of people coming in and out of the synagogue every day, which is kind of unusual. And it went missing during this period and presumed to have been stolen. Then, in the year 2012, shortly after, a year or two after I had become Shamash, a prominent rabbi who I will not name, a prominent rabbi of the West Side who most of you probably know, and I will not name here because I didn't ask his permission, approached Rabbi Angel and told him the following story. Someone who wished to be anonymous acquired a Torah pointer, and while examining it, saw what looked like Dr. Poole on it, and thought maybe this has something to do with Sheretz Israel, but didn't want to be identified. And so he asked this rabbi, who I almost named by accident, to show it to Rabbi Angel and see if he knew anything about it. So the rabbi brings it to Rabbi Angel. Rabbi Angel immediately recognizes it as the pointer that was used every Monday and Thursday in the synagogue. And so this anonymous person then returns it to Sheretz Israel as is proper, bringing it back home. But as you can see, the original dedication, which had the name of Tamar and David de Solapool, and that it was donated for the wedding anniversary of Henry Hendricks and Rosalie Hendricks, is all effaced with the exception of these few letters, where you can see Dr. Poole, everything else is kind of scratched out. But through this, it was able to be identified and brought back to the synagogue. And there it went back into use, which is why I knew about it, which is why I recognized it when we discovered the front half. And so now we have the story is almost too unbelievable to tell, but this is the truth. Okay, this is what happened. We have this very interesting yad returned to Sheretz Israel, enabling us to find it later on when it was discovered to be made in the colonial era by a very famous silversmith. So all of these things come together, and now we have to decide what to do. So through the generosity of one of our honorary trustees, who I also will not name because I also didn't ask his permission if I could name him yet, one day it'll all come out in the papers that I will write one day. Hopefully. um, uh, got us to bring these items to a silversmith in New Jersey, whose name is Ubaldo Vitali. Ubaldo Vitali is a superstar. He is the recipient of a MacArthur Genius Grant. He's a silversmith, but he's also a conservator, an objects conservator who works with silver and museums, and he's also an artist of his own right. These horses you see here are his own creation. He does a lot of horses. In fact, he makes one similar to this of just about every year, I think, for the prize given at one of the big three horse races. I don't know the name of them. It's not my field, but one of those big grand uh, events. So he is a very, very well-known and famous silversmith, and he actually had repaired and done conservation treatments on the Meyer-Myers Rimonim in the past. And the first thing we had him do was to compare the pieces with the one from Newport, which he did under great magnification and all sorts of analysis. And he determined that the Newport one, I'm just calling it the Newport one, the one that was in Newport, was not as finely made as the Meyer-Myers one. The grooves and the twisting here, which there's probably some more accurate way of describing, was not as finely made as the one which had the MM mark on it. And so it was likely a copy made later. This was a very reminiscent thing for us because Shearith Israel also has a pair of Rimonim that are an unmarked copy of the Meyer-Myers Rimonim. They're not as fine, they're not as nice looking, but they are very clearly the same design, meant to be the same style as the Rimonim, and so this could very well fit into the same thing. Perhaps the synagogue had copies made at some point in the 19th century. The other thing to note is that when I went to the archives, Shearith Israel has a inventory that was produced in 1860 by Jacques Judah Lyons. And on that inventory are listed all the pointers are listed and described in various ways. Two of them are described as twisted. And one of those two says in the property of the Chazan. And so I speculate, more research will have to be done, that the one that says Reverend J.J. Lyons on it, and which we later found to have M.M. on it, was that one that he described as in the property of the Chazan. And the one in Newport was the other one, silver twisted. Oh, they also describe the length, 12 inches. They're both the same length and the same weight. And when services started being held in Newport in 1884, 1885, I speculate that this pointer was sent up there to where it stays even to this day and is currently still being used. Even though it is not Meyer-Myers and is unmarked, it is certainly the same style and meant to be the same kind of pointer as the one that had Meyer-Myers on it. Now, going back to now we have these different pieces, what to do with them. So after some consultation with one other piece, which I'll just tell you quickly, I don't have a lot of details. We also sent the pieces, the broken piece and the one that was the composite, to be laboratory tested. Sotheby's had it done for us, and the metals matched. So we knew that the hand part and the handle part and the front part were from the same yad. And not only that, but that was consistent with the coin silver of the colonial era, meaning the same kind of silver that would have been used by Meyer Myers to make his objects in that era. So everything was checking out. And so we decided that we would take apart the composite piece, the one that had been stolen and scratched, and which had been given by Dr. Poole in honor of Henry Hendricks and Rosalie Hendricks, and put it back together, and uh, and put the Meyer Myers back together, as well as this other item, which was determined to be a Central European, probably German, or maybe we'll just call it Central European yad of the early 19th century, circa 1800, I think they say. And so that's what we did. And as you can see, it required some special things because it had been broken here. And so Mr. Vitali had to figure out how to put them back together, including creating something that would make it secure. And so there was a lot of artistry and engineering involved in the conservation treatment that he proposed and did. But so it's now been completed, and it returned to us a few months ago, and I've been sitting on it, and we determined that this Shabbat would be the right Shabbat to use it. So if you come to synagogue this Shabbat, you will see it in action. I cannot promise that it will be used much more frequently than this, or maybe once a year like we do for the other Rimonim. But we chose this Shabbat because this Shabbat, Parashat Mishpatim, we have the mitzvah of Hashavat Aveda, the returning of lost objects. And without the anonymous acquirer of that piece deciding to return it to its rightful home, we would never have been able to put these pieces back together and have the Myers pointer restored and put back into use. And so that is the story that I have for you. There are elements that are still not known. I went to the archives to research Dr. Poole's, the Tamar and David DeToll Poole's gift. There, it is clearly listed, but the circumstances on how he chose what to do were not. But I can speculate that just like we had those two pieces, there were these broken pointers in the possession of the synagogue. And Dr. Poole decided to take them and put them together and restore them and make them used, and they got mixed up. Alternatively, perhaps they had these two just looking exactly like they are here. But maybe he thought they were too long. They're pretty long and heavy for everyday use, and thought, you know what we could do is we'll take this shorter end here and this shorter end here and put them together, and we'll have a new yad that we can use every day. I don't know. That it's possible. It's possible they were broken when Dr. Poole decided to have them put together. It's possible that he broke them, not that he had them taken apart. Unclear. So that's one area that I hope to research. The other thing is, where did this yad come from? Are there any references to it? I know that we had one yad that was made by Myers and for Philadelphia that we don't know. Is this it? It's possible. Why does the inventory from 1860 say it was the possession of the Chazan? Don't know. How did Jacques Judah Lyons come by it, if not from the synagogue? Don't know. So there are things to still research and discover before this story is over. But my story tonight is over. So I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to let everyone unmute themselves. And stop my share. And I hope you enjoy.
Thank you.
Questions, comments? I didn't look at the chat. Let's see what's in Okay, tangential. I think since you mentioned the horse involvement, Vitali worked on silver related to the famous triple count horse. Yes, yes. That's exactly what I was referring to. I don't know how that came up, but perfect. Did any of the other stolen items turn up? No. And we're still looking for them. So if you ever come across some of the other items or the major one, the major other item is a pitcher, a laver, which was donated to the synagogue in 1840 or so by Samson Simpson. And it was used for many, many, many generations until the present, until around 2014 or so, um, for the Kohanim to wash their hands before Birkat Kohanim. And then it went missing. We still have the base of it, but we do not have the actual picture. And so if anyone wants, I'll get you a picture of it. I think I mentioned it a long time ago in one of these classes. And someone had the suggestion that we scan it and scour with AI all the auction catalogs ever. I don't know how to do that. If you do, let me know. So, okay. That's a story. I'm gonna let's see, turn off the recording.